Kia ora, I'm Chelsea Daniels, and this is The Front Page, a daily podcast presented by the New Zealand Herald. There are calls for urgent action after yet another fatal dog attack. The death of a 62-year-old woman in Northland marks the fourth fatal dog attack in 4 years. It's while dog-related injuries and hospitalisations rise every year as well. ACC statistics show more than 29,200 dog-related injuries in 2024-25, nearly half of them a result of dog bites. So how do we get on top of this issue? Should dog control laws go further? Today on The Front Page, SPCA Chief Scientific Officer Dr. Arnja Dale is with us to discuss how we could potentially move forward so no one else dies from a dog attack. First off, why has this current case or most recent case of a dog attack prompted such a strong response from the SPCA?
The reason that we've come out very strongly at the moment is because we have been calling for action since 2015 and meeting with successive ministers over the years. What's changed with this latest tragic fatality is that there's now a lot of media attention and ministerial interest in it. And so that is the difference. Can't explain why, given that we've had 4 fatalities over the last 4 years, this one is any different. But I think people are just saying this is not acceptable. This is not safe. These are tragedies that we actually can prevent with evidence-based review of the Dog Control Act, with evidence-based preventative measures, and it is just not acceptable that we're dealing with an act that is 30 years old and that we know dog bites are increasing. We know that we have had more fatalities in the last few years than we have had. We used to have one every 3 years. That was not acceptable either, but we've had more and more, as well as a lot of publicity around the issues of roaming dogs, particularly in Northland, killing stock, injuring stock, our farmed animals, particularly sheep. People have just said, this is it. This is too much. We don't want to live in this society.
Well, the fact of the matter is that these deaths are completely preventable as well. So why wouldn't we change the laws, as you said, that are decades old? What should we change the laws to? What would be your recommendations?
Well, we've got a number of recommendations, and the first thing that we need to do is that we cannot tinker around the edges and do knee-jerk reactions following these high-profile tragedies, because that doesn't prevent future harm. Reform must be carefully considered, it must be evidence-based, and it must focus on prevention. So our focus as a country must be on stopping the attacks before they happen, not just reacting afterwards. So what we urgently need is a nationwide evidence-based approach, which is modern contemporary legislation that actually focuses on behavioural science and preventative measures. We need consistent enforcement. We need responsible breeding. We need early behavioural intervention. And we need public education involving both dog safety and responsible dog ownership to stop serious incidences before they actually happen. So we're calling for three things. We're calling on an urgent, substantive, evidence-based review of the Dog Control Act, 1996, so 30 years old. It's hopelessly out of date. It's out of step with evidence-based approaches. We're also calling on central government to reinstate grants to councils to subsidise desexing of menacing and roaming dogs as an upstream preventative measure. So they did this in 2017, which was the first time they did it, and the only time they have done it. But desexing is a really important part of the preventative measure. So they had a $850,000 grant back then. But desexing is expensive. It is a barrier. So we need to do this. Central government needs to show leadership and do this. The third thing we're calling for is standardised national guidelines for councils on actions to take following a dog bite incident to ensure that they're proportionate, evidence-based interventions, that they incorporate recognised tools such as the Dunbar Bite Scale. And this actually allows for early intervention and appropriate action to prevent tragedies before they occur because it's a risk-based measure.
In terms of the desexing, we do that with cats anyway at the moment, don't we? To protect native birds?
So the government doesn't provide any funding for cat desexing, and like I mentioned, only once in 2017, which was only $850,000, which actually doesn't go very far, unfortunately.
No.
But the SPCA spends approximately, these are for community animals, these are not for animals in our centres. For community animals, we spend about $4 million desexing community animals. And we particularly have been focusing on Northland because there are issues there. Over the last couple of years, we've desexed about 4,200 dogs in Northland to help solve the problems up there, but it's not enough. This is not an SPCA issue. This is a community issue, and we don't have central government leadership to actually take charge and actually put in some evidence-based systemic preventative measures to stop these tragedies occurring.
Yes, it is actually very sad that we've had another fatality in the north due to marauding, ferocious, as I've described them, homicidal dogs. But there's a deeper reality at stake here. We do have very dangerous, unwanted breeds of dogs here in New Zealand. And they are being crossbred by people who pretend to be hunters, but in actual fact, all they're doing is creating a new type of menace in our community. So please back our government with a deep, vigorous examination and development of new rules and regulations as to what level of fitness should you show before you're even allowed to own a dog. If the dog has maimed and hurt someone, take it immediately from the property, and if they haven't come within 72 hours to accept responsibility, put it down.
Is there any way from stopping people from owning animals before they get them? So we know that they can be charged if, they are a dog owner, for instance, and then you find that dog malnourished or mistreated. You can then place, restrictions on that person as to whether they can own an animal between, the next year, 2 years, 5 years, etc. Is there anything that we can do, or is there anything you think we should do to stop people from owning animals?
Well, there are provisions already under the Dog Control Act that allow courts to disqualify someone from owning dogs in serious cases. But simply asking whether we stop people owning animals altogether sort of misses the broader issue, because most serious incidences do not arise in isolation. What they do is they reflect gaps in early intervention, in enforcement consistency, and national oversight. This is often something that comes up after a tragedy. What we actually need is a full overhaul of the whole system and actually focus on consistent evidence-based measures that will stop these situations occurring. There are situations in other parts of the world that have already put all these measures in place, so we don't need to reinvent the wheel. We can look overseas to where it actually has worked and actually bring them into the New Zealand framework, because New Zealanders deserve better. It is unacceptable for people to be scared to walk down the road, to be kids to be scared to go to school. It's unacceptable, the level of dog bites that occur in New Zealand. We'll look at the ACC data, and over the past 6 years, there's an upward trend in dog bite injury claims. So increasing from 11,500 to more than 14,000 annually. And that is really, really concerning. New Zealand should be very concerned about that. And these figures only reflect reported injury claims. They don't tell us about the severity of these bites. They don't tell us about the underlying causes. And we also know that the majority of dog bites actually are not reported. And part of the reason is that we know that the majority of dog bites occur either in your own home or in homes of friends and families. Often there's a little bit of pressure or people don't want to upset things, and so they're not actually reported. And that is really, really concerning.
So I guess what you're saying is if we had better preventative measures, I mean, fatalities wouldn't happen because presumably those dogs would have been reported somewhere else down the line.
Yes, if you have evidence-based interventions, like the Dunbar Bite Scale that I mentioned, it allows for early intervention and actually appropriate action to be taken before these tragedies occur. And that is the most critical thing, along with education. Education is really, really key here. It's just one part. What we really need is a multifactorial, multi-agency, multi-layered approach, which is happening to some degree already. But what we're seeing is it's not enough. And the reason it's not enough is because we don't have central government leadership. We haven't had evidence-based reform of the Dog Control Act. We haven't had, we don't have consistent national guidelines for councils following a dog bite incident. At the moment, it's a lottery postcode how your council is going to respond, because we don't have these tools to ensure that proportionate evidence-based interventions are actually in place so that risk can be assessed and early intervention can be put in place and appropriate action to prevent these tragedies.
When you say evidence-based, can you give me an example of what that might entail?
So, for example, with dog safety education, we know that there are mixed messaging going into schools now. There are private companies that do it, there's councils that do it, but they're not consistent. And not having consistent messages is confusing, not only to children, but also to parents.
About what happens when you get bitten by a dog?
Well, what happens, how to prevent being bitten by a dog.
Right.
You do not, the most important thing is that children and dogs are always supervised. You never force any interaction. It needs to be on their own measures. You eliminate risk by not letting children go and disturbing dogs while they're sleeping or while they're eating or while they're having chewing a bone. These are all high reward things for dogs. And we know the science says eliminating that risk, making sure there's full supervision, actually reduces dog bites, particularly in that 0 to 9 age group. Now, remember the 0 to 9 age group, these are our small, vulnerable children. And when they get bitten by a dog, the vast majority of them are facial injuries. For adults, when they get bitten by a dog, it's more arms, legs, and hands that get bitten. We know that from the statistics and the analysis that has been done. So we really need to actually help our councils, making sure they're properly resourced and making sure they actually can have consistent behaviour-based risk assessments across councils. And we really need to focus the desexing on menacing dogs and roaming dogs, because we know that is a significant concern for societies to have these roaming dogs. We know that there are parts of New Zealand that this is more likely to occur. So we know that if you do targeted interventions on these communities, it will result in a reduction in dog bites. And that should be what the government is actually focusing on.
I guess I'm finding it hard to understand what a change in the law would mean for getting rid of roaming dogs, say, or menacing dogs, rather, that you can't do and without that education, just getting a grant and saying, hey, here, educate dog owners on what to do. Because in my mind, it's obvious that you don't let a 3-year-old kid or something next to a dog that's eating. You know,
yep.
So
or
why
hug them around the neck, things like that.
Yeah,
are not good for dogs. But most of all, what we need is for dog owners all over as well is to recognise the early signs that a dog is not comfortable in a situation. Dogs signal that they are not comfortable. Sometimes the cues are subtle, but for example, our Dog Safe Happy Homes is all about teaching children and adults about how they can recognise these early signs so that they can actually remove the dog from the situation or the child from the situation, so that we don't actually end up with situations where these behaviours have to escalate and there is no other choice for the animal but to show more overt aggression. We want to be able to eliminate that risk. But the reason we focus on the Dog Control Act is because it was drafted 30 years ago. It doesn't reflect modern behavioural science. It doesn't reflect contemporary preventative approaches. And actually, the Dog Control Act is the legislation that sort of overhangs all of this.
It's really difficult to say, and you can't really put it down to breed. I know a guy who had his Achilles tendon severed by a Chihuahua when he was at work. He was putting blinds up and, don't worry, my dog won't bite, and it severed his Achilles tendon. So we can't look at breeds. All dogs can bite. And this is what people forget, I think. We have people going, oh, I've got a Labrador, they love kids. I think Labrador is a lot more tolerant than other dogs. But there are so many different aspects to it. You know, you having people, and it's lovely to call yourself a parent and to have a fur baby, but they're still a dog. You've got to treat them like a dog, not like a toy.
And just lastly, do you think that we should be, as a society, treat dog ownership as a privilege and not a right?
The question isn't just about whether we should introduce another requirement for dog owners, but whether it actually the evidence shows it will meaningfully reduce risk. And we know for overseas that there's been mixed results unless they're really well designed and consistently enforced and supported by education and behavioural based assessments. So that's really important. So in the UK, they had a dog licence system. This is different to registration, which is currently mandated under the Dog Control Act. This is different. They abolished that in 1987 because compliance was so low and enforcement costs outweighed the benefits.
All right. So because anybody's dog can have puppies, and then I can just give you one and say, do you want one of these puppies, right?
Exactly. That's exactly right. And also, like, introducing knowledge tests for dog ownership is an idea that also comes up. We support education. It absolutely matters. We know that understanding canine behaviour, supervision and early warning signs do reduce risk. But what we've seen from overseas, from the evidence and the international experience, is that actually it's all about the motivated owners will do it, but they don't necessarily reach the small number of high-risk situations where serious harm actually occurs. So if we're really serious about prevention, then any education requirement would need to sit within a broader, modernised framework, which is, consistent enforcement, behaviour-based risk assessment, support from central government for desexing, menacing and roaming dogs, and this comprehensive evidence-based review of the Dog Control Act. So there is no one silver bullet. It needs to be really comprehensive, it needs to be evidence-based, and it needs to be led by central government, and there needs to be buy-in from everybody. I think it's quite clear from what we've heard in the media, particularly this week, that this situation is untenable. It is untenable. Any bite is not okay. So we need to be able to actually put some evidence-based intervention measures in that are early to prevent these tragedies from occurring.
Thanks for joining us, Arnja.
Thank you very much for having me.
That's it for this episode of The Front Page. You can read more about today's stories and extensive news coverage at nzherald.co.nz. The Front Page is hosted and produced by me, Chelsea Daniels. Kane Dickey is our studio operator, Richard Martin, our producer and editor, and our executive producer is Jane Yee. Follow The Front Page on the iHeart app or wherever you get your podcasts, and join us next time for another look beyond the headlines.